All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'll pray for us. Father, I pray that you help us today. I pray you help us understand your word. I pray that you give us a strategy today how to read your word, how to interact with your word. I pray that the power of your word would clearly come through today, and the result will be that we'll trust your word more than ever. We pray all this in Christ's name. Amen. So what we're doing this week as we kind of take a sabbatical from homework is looking at some of the issues with the Psalms. And so we looked at Psalm 1 and 2 and how you could make the argument that that's somehow directly connected to the Messiah. And midway through book 1 of the Psalter is Psalm 22. And Psalm 22 is very interesting because the last thing, according to some of the New Testament Gospels, that Jesus said is actually a quotation from Psalm 22. And in Matthew, it's the only thing that Jesus says when he's on the cross. I think he says 7 things all total when you put everything together, but for several of the Gospels, Psalm 22 forms the center of the crucifixion narrative. And so I want to just read it as literally as I can in Hebrew, and then we're going to talk about some of the things perhaps you find interesting. And so here's the text, and I'm just going to translate it literally as I can. You follow along in the ESV. 22:1, it says, for the boss, for the one in charge, for the one who runs things, to the tune of the doe of the dawn. A doe is a female deer, evidently some kind of tune, on the tune of the doe of the dawn. A worldly song, and it belongs to David, to or for David. My God, El, my El, why have you abandoned me? Far from my salvation are the words of my groaning. Oh, my Elohim, I call by day, and you do not answer, at night, and there is no peaceful rest for me. But you are wholly inhabiting the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried out and were delivered. In you they trusted and they were not put to shame. But I am a worm, and I am not even a human being, the reproach of Adam, despised by people. Every single person who looks at me mocks me. They make mouths with their lips. They wag their heads up and down. This is what they say. Let him roll his cares to Yahweh. Let Yahweh deliver him. Let him rescue him because he delights in him. I think that's all irony. But you are my midwife from the very womb. You're the one who took me as I was born. You made me trust on the breast of my mom. On you I was cast from the womb, from the belly of my mother. You are my El. You are my God. Don't be far from me because distress is near and there's no one who helps. Big bulls surround me. The Avireh of Bashan, whatever the Avirei are, they surround me. Or if we read it a little bit differently, they crown me. They open their mouths against me as a lion. They're ripping and they're roaring. I keep being poured out like water. All my bones are separating from each other. My heart, like wax, is melting in the midst of my insides. My strength dries up like a potsherd. My tongue is glued to the roof of my mouth. You keep pouring me out over and over into the dust of death, because dogs surround me. Congregation, and it's odd that the Septuagint translates this as synagogue of evildoers, hem me in. And then there's a textual variant in this verse. Some manuscripts read one thing and some another. B19a, which is what this book is, says, like a lion, my hands and feet. Other manuscripts read, they pierced my hands and feet. We're going to come back to that. I keep counting all my bones. They're looking, they're staring at me. They keep dividing my garments among themselves. On my raiment they cast a lot. But you, O Yahweh, do not be far. O my help, hasten to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword and from the dog's hand, my precious one. Save me from the mouth of the lion, from the horns of the re'im. And then in Hebrew, it's like you've got ... From the horns of the re'im, you've answered me. So deliver, and then this changes to you've answered me. I will relate your name to my brothers. In the midst of and the Septuagint translates this, the church, the ecclesia. In the midst of the church, I will praise you. O fearers of Yahweh, praise him, all you seed of Jacob. Make him glorious. Fear like a resident alien. I think in our day, this guru would be like an illegal immigrant. Be afraid like an illegal immigrant before him, all you seed of Israel. Why should you do that? Because he did not despise. He did not abominate the poverty of a poor one. He did not abominate the poverty of a poor one. He did not hide his face from him. When he cried out to him, he heard. From with you is my praise in the great church. My vows I will pay in the midst of those who fear him. Poor people will eat and they will be satisfied. They will praise Yahweh, those who seek him. May their singular heart, may their one heart live forever. They will remember, they will return to Yahweh, all the ends of the earth, and they will worship before you all the mishpachot of the goyim, And that word mishpachot is that same word that we saw in Genesis 12:1. I'll bless the one who blesses you and curse the one who curses you, and through you all the mishpachot, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Because the kingdom is Yahweh's, and he is the one ruling over the Gentiles. They will eat and they will worship. All the fat ones of the earth will cower in fear. All those who go down to the dust and his soul isn't alive. A seed will serve him, and it will be related to Adonai for a generation. They will come and they will tell of his righteousness to a people yet to be born, because he did it. May God bless the reading of his word this morning. What do you find interesting about Psalm 22? I read it as literally as I could read it. What do you find interesting about those verses? What do you find challenging about those verses? What do you find confusing about those verses?
The fact that Jesus quotes the beginning two verses.
Jesus quotes the beginning two verses. I think two of the Gospels, it's the only thing that they record that Jesus said. It's so significant.
Doesn't both times come during like a time of pain?
Yeah, he's in the middle of dying. He is dying on the cross. And he quotes, and the odd thing is, they actually quoted in the language that he used. Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which is the Aramaic translation. Jesus spoke Aramaic as his mother tongue. And so in the middle of dying, Jesus quotes Psalm 22, first text. Some people argue that when he says it is finished, he may be quoting the end of Psalm 22. I'm less convinced about that, but it's possible. It's certainly possible. He has done it. He's done what he set out to do. What else do you find interesting about Psalm 22? Do you find it interesting that there are textual variants in Psalm 22?
There's a pretty big difference between pierce my hands and feet and lines around my hands and feet.
Right, that's a huge difference, isn't it? Why don't we look at that? Because this strikes at the question, can I trust my Bible? Is what we have reliable or not? And so if we do that, we're going to look at Psalm 22 in the New Testament. So Mark's version, in the ninth hour, Jesus cried aloud with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. The Hebrew would be Eli, Eli, lama azabthani. It may be that the difference, sabachthani and azabthani, is just a difference. I mean, it is a difference between Aramaic and Hebrew. And it may be that they're having a hard time piecing together exactly what Jesus said. I mean, he's in the throes of death. but they do translate it for us. My God, why have you forsaken me? The key verse where there's a textual variant in Hebrew is verse 17. I think in English translation is verse 16. The reason there's a difference, Hebrew counts the title as verse 1, and so it's the exact same words, it's just they put different words on it. And here's our textual variant. The ESV says, dogs encompass me, a company of evildoers encircles me, they have pierced my hands and feet. And the Jewish translation called Tanakh, Torah Nevi'im Ketuvim, standard Jewish interpretation, says, no, it should be dogs surround me, a pack of evil one closes in on me, like a lion they maul my hands and feet. That seems pretty different in terms of two different readings. That's the difference in Hebrew. So you read words from this side to this side. Ari, have you ever heard somebody like named Ari Shapira? Have you ever heard that name? Okay, that's this word, Ari, lion. So to get like a lion, you have the word kef, which is like a lion. If this letter goes all the way down, then this is actually a verb, and it means they, whatever the verb means. So the difference between they pierce my hands and feet and like a lion my hands and feet is, does this letter have a tail on it or does it not? That's the difference, textual variant.
So do you think it's translated incorrectly?
Well, what I want you to do is I want you to tell me. Okay, so this is the evidence. This is the evidence that's there. So this is manuscript B19A. This is the oldest complete Hebrew manuscript that we have. It's called the Leningrad Codex. It's called the Leningrad Codex when St. Petersburg used to be called Leningrad when it was under communist. And so it's where the Tsar of Russia used to live. And so there's a collection of the Tsar's stuff called the Hermitage, which is like the Louvre, only it's the Russian version of the Louvre. And so in the Hermitage, they have B19A, and it's the oldest complete copy of the Hebrew Bible. It's the oldest complete one we have. We know it was copied in 1008 because the guy who copied it signed his name and he put the year that he did it. Every printed Hebrew Bible is reproducing B19A. So if you've ever seen Hebrew students walking around with a big brown Bible, they call that thing BHS, Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. And what BHS is a faithful copy of one manuscript B19A. And this is the manuscript. So this is the place. So this is the place in that manuscript. So what we have to decide is it this or is it this? Okay? And you guys are smart. You guys are going to be able to tell which one it is. So if it's that, okay, this is one of those letters. And you see how long the tail is and where it comes down to. Can you see that? So if it's they blank, if this is the reading, then this letter should look like this letter. And there are a bunch of these. Here's one. Here's one. Here's one. Now, if it's this, this is what the letter should look like. So here's one. Here's one. Here's one. So is it they pierced my hands and my feet, or is it like a lion, my hands and feet? Which one does the text read? It reads like a lion. You can tell, you see how these are curved, and you see how this one's straight, right? You see how this one's curved, this one's curved, this one's curved. Do you see how this one's straight? This one clearly has the curve, and while it's a little long, it's well short of the bottom line that these letters are. You see that? Now that's a little discouraging, isn't it? It would have been pretty nice if it had said they pierced my hands and feet, but it doesn't. It says like a lion. But remind me when B19A was copied? 1008 AD. Is that old for a manuscript or recent? That's pretty recent. Is there a question we should ask? Are there any older ones? And there are older ones. So what should we do? Look at those. So B19A is the oldest complete one. B19A was copied from the Aleppo Codex. This is the Aleppo Codex. I was in the Shrine of the Book in Israel, and I was just looking at manuscripts, and I stumbled on the Aleppo Codex, knowing that the Aleppo Codex is 78 years older, and I leaned over to read, and you can tell it's under glass. I think it was turned to Psalm 35. So I've been spending years of my life with Psalm 22, and I look over, and here is the Aleppo Codex. I didn't even know it was in the Shrine of the Book. I look, it's open to Psalm 35, and oh, how I wanted to get somebody to go flip that. 2 pages. All we're talking about is 2 pages. The problem is the Aleppo Codex isn't complete. And when the Aleppo Codex was housed in Aleppo, Syria, whenever they would have a riot, people would run in and rip pages out of the Aleppo Codex. Every now and then a family will be plagued, their conscience will be plagued, and they'll send a page back, be missing for 100 years, and they'll send it back. Genesis through Deuteronomy was ripped out. Somebody's got it in their house somewhere, and they need to give it back. Somebody's got it. And the 2 pages that Psalm 22 is on, somebody ripped it out. Somebody's got it. So we have the manuscript, but it doesn't have the page that has Psalm 22 on it. So that's 930 AD. We should ask, are there older manuscripts? And there are older manuscripts. The Psalm Targum, which is a translation in Aramaic of the Hebrew Bible, translates it, biting howl just like a lion. And when you get into the use of the Old Testament in the New, what you find is there's a phenomenon called double translations. And an ancient translator, when he didn't know or she didn't know to do it. If there are two different ways, often they'll do it both ways, and they call that a double translation. And that's actually what the Targum is doing. And I think what they're reading is they're reading this like a lion, and they're reading this like biters of how like a lion, which means that the Targum has said, look, I don't know how to translate. I'm going to translate it both ways. I'm just going to put both of them in there. I guess they didn't know how to do a footnote then, so they just do a double translation. So the Psalm Targum doesn't give us evidence one way or another. It does give us evidence that Jews were a little confused how to deal with the phrase, but either one of those translations, are they reading the long vowel or the short vowel? They're reading the short. So B19A is with the short. We don't know the Aleppo Codex. Psalm Targum, both the readings are reading them as the short, although one of those readings does read it as a verb. If we go back farther, we come to a thing called the Cairo-Geniza. And I imagine you've been part of a church one time in your life where the church decided to do a building project, build a Family Life Center, new auditorium or something. Well, God's people have been doing that forever. They did that in the Cairo synagogue. And the Cairo synagogue had people who copied manuscripts. And whenever you copy a manuscript, the old one, it's like a flag. You're supposed to burn it. You don't want it to be defiled, so you copy it, you make sure it's copied accurately, and then you burn the copy. You burn the original. Well, in the Cairo-Geniza, there was a hoarder who didn't like burning his manuscripts, so he stuffed them in a closet. When they built the new extension, they just bricked the closet up. 400 years later, somebody decided they didn't like the new extension, so they tear the bricked up thing down. They find the closet, and this is what they find: the Cairo-Geniza, the Cairo treasury. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Hebrew manuscripts. And they're all rotting. They're all in pieces. But believe it or not, this man, Solomon Schechter, I think is his name, he went through and classified every single one of those rotting manuscripts, any place where they agree with the Bible. Can you imagine how hard that would have been to do? And so the Cairo-Geniza reads this. So what are they reading, long or short? Short. And if it's short, what does it have to say? Like a lion. So we struck out with B19A. Aleppo Codex doesn't have anything. We struck out with the Targum, and we struck out with the Cairo-Geniza. That used to be as far as you could go with the Hebrew manuscript. Now, you can get at stuff farther back, but you would have to do it through translations. So the Bible was translated into Latin, into Greek, into Aramaic, into Syriac. And so people who are into this would go see what the translations said. And so if we did this is 6th century AD. If we go back to Jerome's the person who did the Vulgate. He did it in Bethlehem. In Bethlehem, there's a church. Underneath the church is a cave. Church tradition says that cave was where the manger was. You can go in it today. It has a little bit door. You've got to bend over and kind of almost crawl in, but you go into this church, go to the front, go down to the cave. In silver, it says the Son of God was born here. Jerome, in that cave, translated the Bible into Latin, and that's what the Vulgate is. There's a statue of Jerome at the front of that church. He didn't really know Hebrew when he started, so he did his translation in 387. But after he'd been living in Bethlehem for 5 years, he learned Hebrew. And once he learned Hebrew, he went back and retranslated parts of the Bible. And one of the first things he did was the Psalms. And they call his translation Textual Hebreus. It's in Latin. Means according to the Hebrews. And Jerome translates verse 17, they have bound my hands and feet. And to get that translation, Jerome was reading this. So there's no aleph in what Jerome was reading. And is he reading the short or the long? He's reading the long. So he still doesn't support they pierced my hands and feet. But he is saying the manuscript I looked at in 392, the Hebrew manuscript I looked at 392, had a verb, not like a lot. That's significant because it's 300 years older than the Cairo-Geniza, but Jerome is a Christian. And so what could the charge be that you bring against Jerome? He's looking to find Christ, so you can't really trust what he says. But it's clear in Textual Hebreus, he's reading the verb. So in Hebrew, there are 4 words that you can get what you read from. And what do you notice about all 4 of these verbs? They're exactly the same. So one is he dug through his hands and feet, he purchased, he gave a feast, or he bound. And which one is Jerome going with? He's going with this one. He's not going with this one, even though they look exactly the same. Pierced, dug through a hammer and a chisel is the idea.
The other ones could work too. Like, I don't know. In some ways, they all could work.
They all could work. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of interested now. There's enough of detective in me. I want to know. What did David write? Did he write the short one? Did he write the long one? Did it have the aleph? Did it not have the aleph? Before Jerome learned Hebrew, he translated it, they have dug my hands and feet. So before he learned Hebrew, he said this is the right one. It's the verb. After he learned Hebrew, he said, no, this is the right one. But both those readings are reading the exact same letters. But he is open to the charge that he's a believer, so we can't, to base a translation exclusively on Jerome, it would be nice if we had more evidence. And we do have more evidence. We have the Old Latin. The Old Latin translates, they have dug. The Old Latin appears to be a translation of the Septuagint, so we don't know if they were reading a Hebrew manuscript or if they were just translating the Septuagint. But when we come to Aquila, Aquila was a person who had been a Christian and decided that Christianity was wrong, and so converted to Judaism. Aquila made a translation that tried to move people away from being Christian. So it's a revision of the Septuagint. Aquila was making the argument Christianity only works if you use the Septuagint, not if you use the Hebrew Bible. But Aquila said the true reading of verse 17 is they disfigured my hands and feet, which presupposes this. What do you notice about this? This is a hostile witness. This is a hostile witness who's saying, do not believe what Christians teach you. But what's he saying the reading of verse 17 is? It's a verb and not a noun.
It also has an
And it has an ion instead of an olive. So this is the difference between an ion and an olive in Hebrew. Ka'eru and ka'aru. Did you hear it? Let me do it again for you. Ka'aru and ka'aru. They're both glottal stops. One is you're squeezing the back of your throat loud enough for people to hear. The other is a glottal stop that you're not squeezing the back of your throat. Ka'eru and ka'aru. What do you find interesting about that? Is this a pro-witness or is this a hostile witness? This is a hostile witness. He says it's a verb. He says it's a long vowel. He even says there's a glottal stop in the second radical. And he's trying to get people not to believe the Bible. What's mind-blowing about what Aquila doesn't translate it as, he doesn't translate it as like a lion. Aquila did not believe like a lion was the right reading. He's a hostile witness. 200. Now, when is B19A 1008? When is the Aleppo Codex? 930. When is the Cairo Geniza? 6th century. When is Aquila? 400 years older than the Cairo Geniza. Aquila rejected his first translation and offered a second translation. They have bound. So what's the difference between the first translation and the second translation? It's still a verb, but he took the glottal stop out. Long or short? Long. So he offers two different readings, but both those readings say the text read a verb, not like a lion. And he's a hostile witness. Symmachus is another revision, and for the life of me, I don't know what Symmachus is reading. I think he's reading this, but he's reading it binders out the same way that Targum did. Now, it is significant that Symmachus, is he reading the long or short? He's reading the short, but it is significant that he's not reading it as like a lion. It's still a verb, seeking to bind. What's that? It's a construct participle, binders of. Yeah, so it would be in a pointed text, a sire yod. In the seeking, he would be implied by the participle. Theodosian's another revision of Septuagint, but we don't have that part extant, so we don't know what he read. The Peshitta is translation into Syriac. Syriac's a version of Aramaic. The Syriac, I mean, this is that letter in Syriac, and the only thing this word can mean is stay pierced. So the Peshitta just means the plain translation, I don't know, that's what it means, plain. They read pierced, but the problem is we don't know who did the Peshitta. If Christians did it, it would be old, but it's not of value because you could argue that they're looking for Jesus. If Jews did it, and it means pierced, then it would be significant, but we don't know. We don't know who did it. Oh, that's as far back as we could go. That's as far back as we could go until 1947. And in 1947, there were some boys, and they had lost a sheep. And they knew if they came home without their sheep, their dad was going to beat the daylights out of them. They were in the middle of the desert. They were looking for the sheep, and they were by a cliff. Matter of fact, I got a picture of it, I think. They're right here. And this hole was dug out. So it used to just be this. And this was put in, that was covered. So there was a little hole like that. And the two little boys wondered if their sheep had fell in there. And they wanted to find out. But they didn't want to climb in there, so what do you think they did? They started seeing if they could throw a rock. So they're throwing rocks, and they're throwing rocks. And one little boy's rock went right in the middle. And when it hit, there were a sound like 150 china plates breaking. So the little boys thought, we're going to have to go home without this sheep, but there's something in there good, and maybe if we take that home, maybe Dad won't beat us. So the two little boys climbed in that cave, and what they found was the oldest collection of Bible manuscripts ever. This is where the Dead Sea Scrolls come from. This is Qumran, Cave 1.
Why would they hide manuscripts in the cave? They would not be not very good conditions for.
So what Qumran is a cult. It was a cult that hated women. Oh my goodness, women were the worst thing in the world. They had to give up all their money when they went into the cult. They got a number. You could only talk when the numbers before you were tired. So if you were 48, 1 to 47 had to not want to talk, and then you got to talk. Somewhere hidden out there is a massive treasure nobody's ever found. We've got the copper scroll, the list of everything in it. It's written on the equivalent of multi-million-dollar paper. But in that cave is 1Q Isaiah A, the oldest document. So, and the way it works is the number is the cave, and then the Q is Qumran, and then the next number is the manuscript that they found. So you can imagine people went and crawled in every cave everywhere, and what they found were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts. So 4Q88. So what does that mean? Fourth cave, Qumran, manuscript number 88, Psalm 22. Guess what Psalm 22 reads in 4Q88? It reads the verb, not the noun. And the reason we know that it has to read the verb is because they don't have the olive. So this you can only read maybe a little bit, but you can definitely read that it doesn't have the olive. Not having the olive, it can't mean lion, because the way you spell lion is olive resh yud. So it has to mean something like they dug through or bound or something like that, 4Q88. Well, 5-6 Nahal Hever. The cave of manuscripts and the cave of horrors. Or horrors, 5 and 6. Why is the cave of horrors? In 70 AD, the Roman army pursued Jews here. The Jews fled into those two caves, and they said, well, we could go fight and kill them, or we can just starve them to death. They chose starving them to death. They starved to death, so all the dead bodies are in there. But in cave 5 are the books. And this is the reading. This is the manuscript. Long or short? Long. And when was it written? And is it written by Jews or Christians? The Jews. You see, what happened is the Jews were getting killed by Psalm 22 because Christians were saying, if Psalm 22 is about David, when was David pierced in his hands and feet? And he wasn't. And so this, that, and other thing, and none of it worked. And so a copyist thought, we burn all the old manuscripts, and when we copy the new manuscripts, and what did that copyist do? He shortened one letter. And he almost got away with it. But he didn't know there would be these old manuscripts. He didn't think about the translations that could be retro-translated. Somebody, either through accident or on purpose, I hope it was on accident, but could be on purpose, tried to change the length of one letter. And could he get away with it? No. It reads, they pierced my hands and feet. The question is, can we trust our Bibles? Well, the truth is that people have been researching this for hundreds and hundreds of years. The evidence is there. We can trust our Bibles. because you can't even get away with changing the length. I mean, you saw it. The difference between those letters is just how long is the tail. And the truth is, you can't even get away with that when you go look at the evidence. If it reads, they pierced my hands and feet, Psalm 22 has nothing to do with David, which means that 1,000 years before Jesus lived, God was predicting what was going to happen. All right, I'll see you on Friday.